I watched her undress in front of him. The overhead light in that motel room, sickly yellow flickering, cut every curve of her body into sharp relief. There was no mistaking who she was, or what she was doing. I felt my heart slow to a crawl, as if each beat needed my permission to go on. Maybe I had stopped breathing. Maybe I stopped existing for a moment. I'm not sure. All I know is that I stood there at the crack of the door, half lost in the stale odor of dust and cigarettes, and realized my entire life was about to split in two. They didn't see me. I had angled myself behind the doorframe. But I saw them, my wife, Rebecca, and a man I recognized from a single photograph on her phone. Brian. He had his hands on her hips, his eyes locked on hers. He leaned in, whispered something I couldn't hear. She smiled, a small, trembling smile, and let the last scrap of fabric drop to the floor. I didn't blink. Couldn't. My pulse hammered in my ears, a dull roar overtaking every other sound. The first thing I felt was an absurd sense of calm, like my mind had shut down to stop me from screaming. I thought about our kids, about how she told me she was pregnant again, and that was the reason she'd been tired. Just exhaustion, she'd said, from the new baby on the way. Sure. And yet here she was, pregnant with my child. Ours, or so I had believed, acting like none of that mattered. I wanted to vomit right there, or maybe burst in and tear him away from her. But I did neither. I simply watched, and for the first time in my life, I felt utterly, finally alone. When I think back to how I ended up at that door, 1,000 tiny details form a mosaic of betrayal. The first piece was a phone message. I'd come home early from a client meeting. Real estate deals had been falling through for weeks, so my schedule was chaotic. I was rummaging in the kitchen for a bottle of water when I heard her phone chime. A voice note. I wouldn't have checked if it hadn't started playing by itself. The phone was on the countertop, and I bumped it with my elbow. I froze when I heard the words, "I miss you. Soon, it'll be all ours. Don't worry." My mind tried to make sense of it. Ours? What was ours? My name is Michael, by the way. Michael Howell. I'm a real estate agent. I deal in property, flipping houses, setting up open house showings. On my good days, I can read a client's face before they even step inside a property. So trust me, I'm not naive. But I still had to fight the numbness creeping through me when I heard that voice note. I'm a father of two, 8-year-old son, 6-year-old daughter. I'm also the husband of a pregnant wife, or at least that's the story I told myself. That message felt like someone taking a chisel to my chest. "I miss you," the man had whispered. "Soon, it'll be all ours." She'd replied with a quick audio clip of her own. "I miss you too." I could tell from the hush in her voice that she was smiling when she said it. That night, I didn't confront her. I sat on the couch, stared at the TV on mute, while she moved around the house like everything was normal. She asked me if I wanted dinner. I shook my head. She never pushed. That was the second clue, I guess, the one that confirmed my fears. She didn't push because she had something else on her mind, a bigger concern than my unusual mood. Let me be clear. I've always taken marriage seriously. Maybe it's old-fashioned, but I believe that once you commit, you protect that commitment with everything you've got. So I tried to rationalize the message. Perhaps it was just an old friend from college who was dealing with a crisis. Perhaps I misheard. But the next day, I found more messages, texts, recordings, pictures. They were careful, but not careful enough. The next puzzle piece came 2 weeks later. She said she was going to a friend's party. In the back of my mind, an alarm bell rang. She was nearly 3 months pregnant. We'd told only close family, and she'd been complaining of nausea for weeks. Now she was dressing up in a fitted black dress, a short jacket, high heels. Her eyes were bright, a glimmer I hadn't seen in a while. She looked radiant, sure, but a small voice inside me asked, what pregnant woman in her right mind goes to a late-night party with a bunch of strangers, looking that excited? I was still holding on to the naive hope that maybe she just wanted some air, some fun. I even said, "Are you sure you feel up to it?" She gave me a brisk nod, forced a quick smile. "I need this," she said. I watched her leave. And then, in a moment of bitter clarity, I grabbed my car keys and followed. Standing behind that motel door was the final piece. I had all the evidence I needed. She was pregnant, yes, but by me. Or by him. My mind was a swirl of questions. I thought of the day we met. Her standing in a hallway on campus, flipping through brochures for the marketing club. She was so open, so full of dreams. At least, that's how I remember it. She used to tell me how she wanted to write a book one day about healing and self-discovery. I was the practical one, always telling her how to plan finances, how to invest, how to build a stable life. We married young, had our first son, then a daughter. We built a life in a quiet suburb near Seattle. I worked my tail off to afford that house with the neat lawn and the white fence. So many open houses, so many deals, so many carefully measured smiles to prospective buyers. And she was there, giving me that look of pride. Or so I believed. Inside that motel, she pressed her body against Brian's. I glimpsed the tension in his shoulders as he cradled her. I saw the shape of her waist, curving with pregnancy, and the slight bulge that should have been the sign of our future. My throat closed, but my eyes stayed open. She didn't know I was there. Neither did he. I let myself become a ghost in that hallway. Eventually, I slunk back, heart pounding, and made my way to my car. I drove home in silence. In my mind, I played it all out, imagining how I could smash everything in that filthy room or burst in demanding answers. But I just let it be, because something deeper clicked inside me. It was a sense of absolute emptiness, like I'd died on my feet. I didn't want a confrontation. Not yet. I wanted her to reveal herself, to show me exactly how far down this path she'd gone. When she finally came home later that night, I was in the living room, staring at my phone. She smelled like a mix of perfume and cheap motel. I said nothing. She paused in the doorway, gave me a faint smile, then walked upstairs. No words, no excuses. As if I didn't exist. And maybe I didn't to her. Maybe that was the moment I realized she wasn't even seeing me anymore. I started digging deeper. Look, I'm no detective, but real estate has taught me how to research property history, how to find hidden lions, hidden owners. Finding hidden truths in my own house was easier than I care to admit. I found receipts for dinners, hotels. Some were under her name, some were under Brian's, and one receipt was for a pregnancy test, purchased weeks before we even discussed having a third child. Every detail told me that she planned this in some twisted way. Maybe not planned to get pregnant, but planned to keep secrets from me for months. The kids began asking why Mommy was out so often, meeting friends. I tried to keep them shielded. I loved those kids more than my own life, so I made sure to change their school quietly, telling them it was for a better academic program. They believed me. They always do. I remember filling out the new school's paperwork, my hand shaking so badly I nearly tore the forms. Because transferring them was my first real step in building a fortress around them. I didn't want them to see her spiral into something I couldn't define yet. Meanwhile, in bed at night, she'd turn away from me. Or on rare nights when she'd face me, there was a guarded tension in her eyes, like she was bracing for the question she knew I wouldn't ask. Where were you? She never volunteered an explanation. And I said nothing, because I was letting the rage build, letting it fuel me for what came next. I spoke softly when I confronted Brian the first time. That happened in the parking lot of an upscale office building downtown, where he worked in cybersecurity. He was stepping out of his black SUV, glancing at his watch, clearly in a hurry. I'd done some digging. His name, his job, everything. I knew exactly where to find him. Brian, I said, stepping in front of him. My voice was calm, almost polite. He looked up, confused. Do I know you? I smiled, that hollow kind of smile that probably looked more like a grimace. No, I said. But you know my wife. He stiffened, His eyes darted around like he was calculating escape routes. But I just stood there, arms at my sides, not threatening him physically, not raising my voice. "I'm Michael Howell," I said. "Rebecca is my wife." I let that sink in. "And the child she's carrying might be mine," I added softly, "or it might be yours." He didn't reply. Instead, he swallowed, looked at the ground, then opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. He started to mumble an apology. "I'm sorry. We never meant." I cut him off. "Don't. I'm not here for your apology. I just want you to know I've seen enough." I leaned in, still using a low, even tone. "You can keep her if you want, but there's a price." He blinked, confusion shading his face. "What are you talking about?" "That child," I said, "the one she's carrying." I paused, letting that image sink into him. "We're getting a test. And if it's yours, you're going to pay. If it's mine, I decide how this ends." He tried to speak, but I put a hand on his shoulder. Not harshly, more like a quiet warning. "Go to hell, or go back to your fancy office. I don't care, but when the time comes, you'll hear from me." For a moment, we just stared at each other, two men standing in a concrete parking structure, the echo of footsteps and car engines in the background. Then he nodded, stepped around me, and hurried away. I got in my car and drove off without looking back once. That night, I returned home early. Rebecca wasn't there yet. The house was quiet. The kids were in their rooms, whispering over some silly game. I felt the entire place vibrating with tension, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. I had a small box in my hand. Rings. Our old wedding bands, which I had polished not too long ago, hoping it might rekindle something between us. A foolish gesture, looking back on it. I left them on the kitchen table, then walked around the house, picking up memories. A photo of us on our wedding day, beaming smiles. A drawing our daughter made of the four of us. Rebecca in a bright dress, me in a stick figure suit. Both kids with big scribbled hearts. I realized that none of it felt real anymore. Like I was sifting through artifacts of a life that belonged to someone else. My chest burned, my jaw clenched. I kept my voice quiet, though no one was there to hear me. I said, "I'm done." She came home after 10. I was sitting in the living room with a half-finished bottle of whiskey. She paused, saw me swirling the amber liquid. I could sense her hesitation. "Michael," she began carefully, "I didn't realize you'd be up." I glanced at her. "I'm up." Soft voice, monotone, as if my emotions had died. She gave a slight nod, walked to the kitchen. Probably saw the ring box on the table. I heard the scrape of the wooden chair. She sat down, opened it. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wavering. "You tell me," I said, remaining in the living room, letting my voice carry. I didn't move from my seat. I imagined her taking the rings out, seeing the polish, the freshly inscribed date. It was the date of our wedding, all those years ago. A naive time, I guess. "This is," she paused. "I thought we'd lost these. Why are you?" I could almost hear her heart pounding in that question. She was suspecting I'd discovered everything, but she didn't know how I found out, or how much I knew. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, set the whiskey bottle on the counter, and looked her straight in the eye. "Put it on," I said quietly, pointing to her wedding ring. "If it means anything to you, or don't. It's your choice." She stared at me, searching my face for a clue. "Michael, what's going on with you?" I exhaled, measured. What's going on with me? I guess I'm just figuring out how to handle all the leftover pieces of a marriage. She leaned forward. "Stop being cryptic. Talk to me." I gave her the smallest shrug. "You haven't been talking to me for months. Why should I talk now?" My tone was calm, almost gentle, but it cut her anyway. I saw it in her eyes, the flicker of guilt or fear. She looked away, focusing on the ring box. I turned to leave, And before I stepped out of the kitchen, I said, "Don't worry, Rebecca. We'll make it work, one way or another." She shivered at my words, maybe at the emptiness in my voice. Then, as I disappeared into the hallway, she whispered something, maybe my name, but I just kept walking. I carried out my plan over the next few days. I arranged the paternity test without her knowledge. She wasn't far enough along for it to be straightforward, but I found a doctor who would do it discreetly using non-invasive prenatal testing. Because that's who I am, right? Methodical, strategic, each step carefully placed. By the time the results came back, I'd already moved out half my savings into a separate account. I'd enrolled the kids in their new school under my sole guardianship. I had documents drawn up by a lawyer friend, transferring certain assets into my name only. I was preparing for the end. The test results arrived in a sealed envelope. I opened it alone in my office. At stale corporate carpet, the hum of the overhead lights, I felt like I was hearing thunder. The words on the page told me everything. 99.9% probability that the child was mine. I sat there, feeling neither joy nor relief. Just acceptance, like a man reading a verdict he expected. So she was carrying my child, and yet she was giving her body, her heart, to someone else. My jaw tightened as I slipped the paper back into the envelope. In that moment, I understood what my final step had to be. I let her find out in the coldest possible way. The next morning, I told her we were going to see my lawyer about some business documents. She didn't question it. My voice was that same soft deadness as always, and I think she was too scared to push. I drove us downtown. She sat in silence, fiddling with her phone. When we got to the law office, I guided her inside. She looked at me, confused. "Why here?" she asked. I pointed to the sign on the wall. "Family law." "You might as well know," I said in a quiet voice. "I'm filing for divorce." Her eyes widened. "Michael, what? You can't just... Why?" My expression didn't change. "I've had enough," I said. "I know everything, Rebecca. The texts, the meetups, the motel, Brian, all of it." She glanced around, as if worried people might overhear. Her voice dropped to a strained whisper. "Let's talk about this at home." I shook my head slowly. "We're past that. I'm done talking." I handed her a copy of the paternity results, then turned away. For a moment, I saw raw shock on her face when she realized I'd known she was sleeping with another man while carrying my child. I didn't let her speak. I just walked into the lawyer's office, let the door close behind me, leaving her out in the corridor. That was my revenge. No theatrics, no screaming, just a cold, calculated severing of ties. She tried to resist, to talk to me. But I signed the papers. I asked for full custody. My lawyer, well prepared, had everything laid out. It's not a simple process, but I'd done my research. She was left with the fact that her betrayal was exposed, that I held every advantage. In the end, she had no real defense. She wanted to beg, or protest, or lash out. But I saw her eyes, saw the panic, the guilt. I suspect she was hoping for a confrontation that might let her cry, might let me break down, so we could have a meltdown or a reconciliation. Instead, she got silence and a steady flow of legal documents. Let me step back for a moment. This all sounds mechanical, heartless. Maybe it was. Because the man inside me, the one who used to love his wife, was already dead by the time we stood in that corridor. I had no tears left, no remorse to share. She kept looking at me as if searching for some spark of the old Michael. But I was gone. She tried to apologize, then to blame me for not being present enough, for focusing on work. It didn't matter. My decisions are made, I told her in the same soft monotone. We're finished. Rebecca followed me out to the car, tears streaking her face. She got in the passenger seat, breathing in shallow gasps. I drove. 10 minutes passed in silence. Then she spoke up, voice trembling. Do the kids know? I transferred them to a new school, I said. They'll be out of the line of fire. No rumors, no neighbors talking, no pitying glances. She gripped her seatbelt. You can't just uproot them like that. I shot her a look. I can do a lot of things, apparently. You should be the last to talk about uprooting anything. My voice stayed soft, but she flinched like I'd slapped her. We pulled into the driveway. I parked. She opened her mouth, tried to say something, but nothing came out. The children were inside. My mother had come to watch them. I got out, walked around to the passenger side, opened her door. Go see the kids, I said quietly. They've missed you. She stared at me with reddened eyes. Michael. I closed the door before she could finish, then turned my back on her. Over the next days, I proceeded with all the ugly details of separation. She was so stunned she moved around in a daze. Brian tried to reach out to me a few times, sent me voicemails, but I never responded. I told him all he needed to know. I did run into him once more. He trailed me out of a grocery store, calling my name. I turned and saw him standing there, looking half ashamed, half indignant. Hey, he said, I just want to talk. You said you got a test. I cut him off, stepping closer so I could see the sweat beading on his temples. The baby's mine, I said with lethal calm. That's all you need to know. He exhaled, relief and maybe fear mixing on his face. Look, he continued, voice unsteady. I didn't set out to break up your family. It just happened, and I stopped him with a raised hand. I don't care. Keep her, don't keep her. It's not my concern anymore. Then I stepped away, turned back once to add, but if you ever come near my kids, I swear I'll bury you. I said it softly, no theatrics. He believed me, because he froze. I walked off, leaving him standing there in the parking lot, uncertain and exposed. Memories assaulted me at random times. I'd be in the kitchen, washing a plate, and I'd see her reflection in the window. Some old memory of her dancing behind me, laughing. Or I'd pass the children's bedrooms and remember the nights we'd sit at their bedsides, reading them stories about princesses and dragons, letting them drift off to sleep. Each memory cut like a dull blade, slow and agonizing. But I kept going. My anger, or maybe my emptiness, propelled me forward. The day came when the last bit of my plan fell into place. Our new living arrangement was set. I found a smaller house in a neighborhood near the kids' new school. I sold the old place quietly. My real estate connections helped me keep it off the general market for a quick, discreet sale. Rebecca was still living there, lost in her own purgatory, not wanting to accept that everything was slipping away. But she had no means to stop me. The house, the finances, I controlled them. She'd see the sold sign appear on the front lawn, and that would be that. She'd have to leave eventually. She wanted to talk, to salvage something, but I gave her no opening. I moved through the house like a shadow, rarely speaking to her. The kids were already adjusting to the new place, so they weren't in the old house to witness the final meltdown. One evening, I found her in the old master bedroom, sitting on a small stool, wearing only an oversized t-shirt. She looked so small, like a girl playing at being an adult. The same stool where she used to sit and brush her hair. She looked at me with haunted eyes. I remembered the assignment from my old heart, love and protect this woman. But that heart was gone. I approached her, quiet. She stared at the floor. I don't know how we got here, she said, voice cracking. I'm sorry, Michael. I don't even know who I am anymore. I nodded, once. Yeah, I murmured. I get that. Then I walked out. Soft words, but lethal to her. She sobbed into the silence behind me. I felt nothing but a faint twinge, like an echo of pity for the person I used to know. Some nights, though, my dreams turned violent. I'd see them together in that motel. I'd watch her arch her back, whisper in his ear, and I'd bolt awake, drenched in sweat. My mind was punishing me, showing me the worst possible frames over and over. But with each repetition, I felt the old Michael receding further into darkness. I'd get up, pace the house, or sometimes just stand in the yard, breathing the cold night air until dawn. Once, while driving the kids back from an after-school club, my daughter asked, "Daddy, is Mommy okay?" She doesn't smile. I glanced in the rearview mirror, saw her concerned brown eyes. I forced a smile. "She's just tired, honey. She'll be fine." A lie. But it's what you do to shield your kids. You lie so they can keep their childhood a little longer. The months dragged. The divorce process, hammered out in slow increments, faced no real opposition from her. She was too broken, too paralyzed by guilt to fight. She moved into a small apartment, paid for partly by me, court-ordered support until the baby was born. I had no issue providing for that, because the baby was mine, no matter how tarnished the circumstances. Rebecca tried to reach me a few times, wanting to meet, to talk, to see if there was a chance for therapy, for coming back together. But the man she wanted was gone. I never responded. I let the lawyers do the talking. In the final court hearing, she appeared pale and drawn, her pregnant belly now obvious. I avoided looking at her. Our lawyers spoke, we signed. That was it. A dull, formal anticlimax. I walked out of the courtroom without saying a word. People think revenge is loud, violent. For me, it was that stillness, that chilling quiet. I'd severed every bond we had. She was left to carry our child alone, living in the wreckage she created with that man. Whatever illusions she entertained, maybe that Brian would swoop in and rescue her, seemed to fade. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, that relationship fizzled fast once he grasped the magnitude of her baggage. So she was alone, financially dependent on my support, waiting to give birth. It wasn't exactly a triumphant feeling for me, more like a grim sense of order restored. My kids were safe in a new environment, shielded from rumors at the old school. They'd see their mother in supervised visits, but there was a distance there that no one could breach. She tried, but they were confused, sometimes resentful. She'd have to live with that heartbreak every day. I survived. That's all it was. I survived the betrayal. It cost me my illusions, turned me into a man who speaks softly and kills what's left of love with a single sentence. But I survived. I remember picking up the kids after their first month at the new school. My son climbed into the front seat. He was proud of being older now, and my daughter hopped into the back. They argued playfully over what music to listen to. For a moment, I let myself smile, because no matter what I'd lost, I still had them. That was the shape of my future now. As I drove home, I realized something. I wasn't trembling or racked with nightmares at that exact moment. The kids were a comforting presence, a sign that life goes on, even after the worst of betrayals. I found a flicker of peace in that routine. Homework, dinner, bedtime stories. Rebecca was an afterthought. She'd call occasionally, wanting to speak to the kids. I'd let them talk, but I'd keep the phone call short. She'd ask me how I was, and I'd respond with a polite, "I'm fine," then hand the phone off to our son or daughter. There was nothing left to say. The day the baby was born, I got a text from her sister. "Rebecca's in labor." I felt a swirl of emotions, but no compulsion to rush to the hospital. The court arrangement was clear. I'd get paternal rights once the baby was confirmed as mine, and all the formalities were settled. I wasn't about to hold her hand in the delivery room. That ship had sailed the moment I watched her betray me. Still, I made a choice. I went to the hospital anyway. Not for her, but for my newborn child. Inside the waiting room, fluorescent lights hummed, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air. After an hour, a nurse guided me to see the baby. The nurse said gently, "He's in the neonatal ward, healthy and stable. Mother's resting." I nodded, heart heavy. "May I see him?" She nodded and led me down a corridor. There, behind a pane of glass, was a row of newborns, wrapped in pastel blankets. She pointed to one sleeping peacefully, a tiny knit cap over his head. My son, my third child. I stared at him, felt something flicker in my chest, some paternal instinct that refused to die. I pressed my hand to the glass. "Welcome to the world, kid," I whispered. Then I closed my eyes, fighting off a surge of emotion. The nurse left me alone, sensing I needed privacy. After a few minutes, I turned away from the glass and walked toward the maternity ward. Rebecca's room was to the left. I paused in front of the door, hearing the quiet beeps of monitors inside. She was awake, propped up on pillows, eyes half-lidded. She turned her head, spotted me in the doorway. There was no anger in her face, only exhaustion, sorrow, and maybe a hint of hope. She tried to speak, but no sound came out initially. Finally, she managed a hoarse whisper. "He's beautiful, isn't he?" I nodded. "Yes," I said softly, "he is." Then I looked at her for a moment. She had tears in her eyes. She was wrecked, physically and emotionally. "But that doesn't change anything," I added quietly. She swallowed, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. "I'm sorry, Michael." I stepped back, my hand sliding off the doorknob. "Get some rest. I'll handle the paperwork." With that, I left her alone. There was no warm reunion, no forgiveness. I had none to give. The months following the birth were a legal labyrinth. Custody arrangements, visitation schedules, child support. My older kids asked if their new brother was going to live with us. I told them it was complicated. At times, I hated the word complicated, but that's what it was. I intended to bring him into my home eventually, because he was my child. But first, I had to ensure the environment was stable, that the older kids wouldn't be traumatized by the presence of a baby tied to an act of betrayal they couldn't fully grasp. Rebecca seemed to realize the depth of what she had lost. She wrote letters to me, long, emotional confessions about her confusion, her mistakes, her regrets. I read them, but I didn't respond. She talked about Brian as a temporary madness, how she was lonely, how I was distant. Maybe part of me believed that I had contributed to her dissatisfaction, but I wasn't interested in bridging that gap anymore. That's what trust is. Once shattered, you can't just glue it back together. Not for me. At one point, we had a tense conversation in the lawyer's office. She asked if I would ever consider letting her come back, for the sake of the children. The look on my face must have answered that question before my mouth did. "No," I said softly. She bowed her head and left the room without a word. Meanwhile, I sold the old house. For me, that was the final burial of our shared memories. People often say a house keeps the echoes of the people who lived there. If that's true, I didn't want those echoes haunting me. The new owners moved in swiftly. I heard the husband mention how cozy it felt, how perfect it would be for their small family. I gave him a polite nod, handed him the keys, and drove away. Didn't look back once. My new home was smaller, but it felt safer somehow. My older kids had their own rooms, decorated to their tastes. My daughter with her pink fairy lights, my son with his sports posters. I kept a room ready for my new baby boy, though he was still with Rebecca for the first few months, per the arrangement that gave her postpartum recovery time and partial custody. But I knew that eventually, if she couldn't provide a stable environment, I'd take him too. I'm a father. My kids come first. Days turned into weeks. My life found a routine again. I'd wake early, make breakfast, see the kids off to school, head to my real estate job. My performance at work improved, ironically, maybe because I poured all my focus into deals, into the next commission. I was on autopilot in my personal life, but professionally I soared. Clients found me calm, reassuring, methodical. Nobody suspected the storms that had ravaged my family life. If anything, I'd become more collected, more lethal in negotiations. A top producer in the office, my boss congratulated me with a handshake, said, "You're unstoppable." He had no idea. Rebecca called me one night, weeks after the baby was born. I answered only because it was a scheduled day for her to speak to the kids, but the kids were already in bed. Our conversation was brief, stilted. I just Wanted to check on you, she said softly. I sighed into the phone. I'm fine. She hesitated. He's asleep now. You know, your son. He's healthy, strong. I closed my eyes. Good, I whispered. That's good. Another pause, filled with the static hum of the phone line. Michael, she began. What? I asked gently, though I already knew the answer. She wanted me to save her from the loneliness she created. Her voice trembled. I miss you. I miss us. Even if you can never forgive me, I just want you to know how sorry I am. I let out a slow breath. Rebecca, I believe you're sorry. Then I let the silence stretch, a weapon in itself. But it doesn't change anything. She sobbed softly, then hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time. I felt a slight pang, but it was overshadowed by the vacuum inside me. Eventually, she tried to rebuild her life. She found a more stable job in marketing, moved to a slightly bigger apartment. The baby's father, me, covered partial expenses, but she managed the day-to-day alone. Brian was gone. She told me once, in a watery half-confession, that he had cut her off when he realized she was seeking some form of deeper commitment. He wasn't built for that. She gambled her family on a man who wanted a fling. She lost. People sometimes asked me, why don't you hate her more? Or why not forgive and move on? The truth is, I neither hated nor loved her in the end. She was a stranger who wore my wife's face. That's what betrayal does. It tears away illusions, leaving a hollow shell. I guess I let that shell keep breathing because we had children to raise. One afternoon, after nearly a year, I took my youngest son to the park for the first time. He'd just turned 7 months old and was at my place for a weekend. He had her eyes, large and brown. He giggled when I lifted him over my head, the late summer sun warming us both. My older kids ran around the playground, shouting and playing. People saw me, a single dad with 3 kids, and would smile politely. I realized I wasn't broken anymore, at least not in the way I had been. The ragged edges were healing, replaced by a quiet resilience. I watched my children, listened to their laughter, felt the weight of my youngest in my arms. In that moment, I thought of the unstoppable chain of events that had led here. The messages on the phone, the motel, the scene behind the door, the Cold War of divorce, the final severance. I pictured Rebecca, alone in her apartment, living with what she'd done. I pictured Brian, scuttling off to some new city. And I pictured myself, still standing, still breathing, raising these kids the best I could. That's the thing about betrayal. You think it kills you. And in a way, it does. But there's a version of you that comes out the other side, stripped of all illusions, stronger than you'd ever believed possible. Does it hurt? Yes. But you learn to live with the pain. I drove the kids home that evening, still in that thoughtful mood. Once they were settled in bed, I flicked off the hallway light and stood in the dark, gazing at the faint glow of a nightlight beneath my daughter's door. Life went on. My heart had turned to stone, but I could still keep my children safe, still guide them forward. That's how I found my purpose after everything. Rebecca was left with her regrets, her sorrow, her empty arms at night. She was stuck in the realm of her own making, and that was the final piece of my revenge. No fists, no guns, no shouting. Just emptiness where once she had a husband who would have died for her. I was gone, and she knew it. Sometimes, I get asked if I regret not giving her a second chance, but regret is for men who still believe in a future with the person who broke them. I don't. I have my children, my career, and a sense of self that I lost somewhere along the way, then rebuilt with new steel in my spine. That's enough. I watched her undress in front of him. That image is carved into my soul. It killed me that night. But from that death, I crawled out stronger, colder, and maybe a little less human. That's the price we pay for survival. And if there's one thing I know for certain, it's this. Once trust is gone, it can never be the same. We can pretend, but deep down, we know the truth. I chose not to pretend. In the end, I survived. She didn't, not in the way that matters. She's still alive, of course, still breathing. But she's locked in that silent guilt, day in and day out. I guess that's worse than any punch I could have thrown. Because I walk free, while she's forever haunted by what she did. That's real justice in my book. And that's how it ends. A cold, quiet ruin. Her ruin. And me, walking away, never looking back.